for you. Gone many miles, this much is true. Oh yeah, I've been so lonely, I've been so blue. Listen now.
Welcome to The Entertainer. I'm your host, George DeJohn, and we're here today with our special guest, recording artist Eddie Garrett of Sarasota, Florida. Welcome to the show, Eddie.
Good to be here, George.
You've just released your 14th CD called Cutting Loose. I have a copy of it right here. And we have some questions here that our viewers have submitted that we'd like to ask you.
Sure, go right ahead.
Eddie, how did you get started in the music business?
Well, George, I'm a pre-K. I'm a preacher's kid, and my dad was a Baptist pastor, and when I was born, and still alive today at 83, and he still pastors the same church. And so I started out in music by listening to the female piano player. Okay. And I was always amazed as a little boy how she could play with both hands and play melody. She read music and she turned the page, and I was always amazed how she could do that and sing at the same time. And so as a young kid, I was really mesmerized by that. But when I got about 7 years old, our grandfather moved in with us and at our house, and he played box guitar, acoustic guitar. And he used to sit on the edge of his bed and play acoustic guitar. And when I'd hear him play, I'd run in there and sit down Indian style on the floor, you know, my hands like this, looking up at him, and was just amazed at him strumming and playing and singing. And I remember asking him one time, I said, Grandpa, I said, how do you get famous? How do you make it big? And he put the guitar down and he said, come with me. And so we lived in the country at the time, and he took me outside, and we walked about 1/8 of a mile down the road, and there was a telephone pole with a flyer on it, 8.5 by 11, black and white, and had this guy strumming a guitar and singing on a mic, and it said, Friday night, Bill Baker, you know, or something like that, at the Joe's Bar and Grill, let's say. And he said, that's how you make it. Well, at 7 years old, I didn't know what that meant, you know. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? He said, well, you make yourself famous and pray somebody recognizes it. He said, but you got to make yourself famous. And I said, what do you mean by somebody recognize it? He said, somebody with money, somebody with financial backing. And so I learned that there's a lot of good talent out there in the world. Used to be pumping gas and working little cashier jobs that have no financial backing. You know how that is. In the music business, you just about have to have the financial backing. So he taught me that you make yourself famous.
Yeah, someone to believe in you. Like
yes,
that.
Sure. That's willing to put that big money up for you.
And
you know.
Who were your earliest influences?
I would say as a guitar player, the Ventures.
The Ventures.
The Animals.
The surf music. Like
yes.
That.
Well, the guitar instrumental stuff. I was into Eric Clapton, the early Eric Clapton, the Beatles, of course. And I was involved in that early stuff like that. And I would say later on in the 60s, it became, late 60s, 70s would have been Santana, Allman Brothers, that type of thing, and kind of really got into that a lot.
Nice. Did you ever take any music lessons?
Not per a music store or something. The way I learned is I got my grandfather to show me some basic chords on the guitar, and when I got 18, well, I mean, I had guys show me things, guys at school, you know, that played a little bit.
So you're kind of self-taught?
Yes, yes.
Self-taught? So yes. What was your most learned period in perfecting your talent?
Well, that's a tough one. I would say my most learned period, but let me go back to the last question and finish that up a little bit. The last question being, what was it?
Do you ever take any music lessons?
Yes, music lessons. When I got 18, when I turned 18 in Ohio, you could go into bars and nightclubs, And so I used to go into all these clubs where they had bands, and I'd sit in front of the guitar player with a little pad and a notebook and a pen. And I'd jot down chords.
Taking notes about his notes.
That's right, everything he did. And I'd go up to him and get to talk to him, see if I can't be friendly with him and get a phone number, maybe an address of where he lived or something. And a lot of times I would go at their house at 7 o'clock in the morning and knock on their door. And I didn't know they got in at 4 a.m. And I'd knock on their door and I'd say, hey, can you show me something on the guitar, Oh, Eddie, come back later.
So you were like kind of compelled to learn on your own.
Oh, yes.
You didn't just kind of magically think something was going to fall from the sky. You had to seek it out and work at your music.
It's a lot of work, but I went around, got to learn all the guitar players. Back then, when a band played at a club, as you know, they were a house band. Now there's no such thing as house bands anymore. They change every night. And so back then, a certain band played here all the time, a certain band played at that club all the time, and I'd go around and got to know all of them and get them to show me what they know. And so I learned a lot from that way. I learned a lot of different styles and
great.
picking styles.
Nice.
For guitar. Now we go to that next question.
Okay, well, and then the most learned period in perfecting your talent. What was that?
George, that had to be, I would say,
your abilities.
in the late 70s, early 80s. I'm 62, so I'd have been around 25. I'd say around 22 to 28 years old. I started playing with the Blacks, the black groups in Cincinnati. I was from a little north of Cincinnati, and I'd played with this black fella, and he took me down to the projects and introduced me to a lot of musicians. And I learned a lot of stuff from playing with the Blacks. I was in a lot of their bands where I was the only white person in the band. And I learned a lot about music. They taught me so many things. One thing that they taught me is Blacks would make up a word and then create a meaning for that word and then write a song about that word, And I did that on Saxified album with Sensibility. I created the word sensibility, and all your senses are directed towards, a female, so to speak, and all that. And so I learned that. But also the thing I learned about the Blacks is you'd be playing a song, and the guy be playing the bass, the guy keyboard, you had a horn player, and they're all-time horn players, and rhythm guitar players and stuff. And after the next song, the bass player would be over on the drums, and the drummer would be over on the keyboard, and the guitar player would be over playing a horn, and they were multi-instrumentalists. And so
that's good.
I learned how to play many different instruments from playing with the black groups, and so I learned a lot about that.
How many instruments do you play?
Well, I can play bass, drums, keyboards, all guitar, slide, acoustic, and those are probably the basic ones, and a few other percussion instruments and things like that. But those are ones.
So you've become a multi-instrumentalist as well.
Yes. On a lot of my albums, a lot of my tunes, I'm playing most, if not all, the instruments. And I bring in a horn player or something like that. Occasionally I'll bring in a drummer, or I'll bring in a keyboard player or another guitar player, but generally it's been myself.
Okay, very good. You are watching The Entertainer. We're going to take a short music break, and we'll be right back with our special guest, Eddie Garrett.
Cried many tears, just felt I could die. But I want to tell you, heaven knows I've tried, oh yeah, but I kept on going, seems like all the time. Once had my dreams, yet only sorrow, but I kept on praying, surely she'll be here tomorrow, yeah, it's what I'm saying, nothing but
back with our guest, Eddie Garrett, who's just released his 14th CD entitled Cutting Loose. There it is. And another viewer asks, your original songs on your CDs seem to vary wildly or be different from one song to another. Why is that?
Well, I'm a product of the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Oh, that
And
explains it.
Yes, it does. In the 50s, you had the doo-wop type of music, as you know. The 60s, you had the British rock, and then you got to the late 60s, you got more into the psychedelic thing that was really going strong, and the early 70s, and then the classic rock of the mid 70s, and you had your disco era, go through the country era with Urban Cowboy, and then the funk period of the late 70s, early 80s, and then a lot of pop. So when I write a song, George, I may write one song in a funk mode, I may write another one in a country mode or a 50s style. And so when you hear one of my albums, you know, like a lot of people, they sound the same on each one, you know, it's more or less same style on each song, and mine vary wildly as the questioner asked, because that's the way I don't want to write the same style 8 songs or 10 songs on an album. I want to write, you know, different genres, and so that's what I do.
And where do you get your inspiration for writing?
My inspiration comes from a lot of different things. Some secular things I write about, but mostly my inspiration comes from personal relationships. I'd say from my woman. You know, I've been married a few times, so if we're going through good times and you just meet somebody and you're falling in love, you write happy falling in love songs, and when you start to break up and things are falling apart, and you write heartbreak songs, you know, that type of thing.
Okay.
And so generally my inspiration comes from my relationships.
And how long does it take you to write a song?
Well, most of them come really quick. I would say some have taken weeks and months, and those I tend to think are more contrived, you know, or less contrived. Less contrived.
Okay.
What I mean is sometimes if you write something real quick and you want to force something, you know, it can be a little contrived. But I guess contrived can be for the longer ones as well, you know. And I've written some songs that were contrived, but most of them, they come pretty quick, and I usually write either with a piano or with a guitar, acoustic guitar.
Yeah,
Les Paul.
Les Paul there. And you know, has tragedy impacted your writing, and or?
Well, it's affected my music, yes.
Now, what was the greatest tragedy in your life that affected you?
I would say the greatest tragedy would be 1983. Me and my first wife, Linda, then had went to a gig, and we dropped our daughter off at her grandmother's to spend the night because we weren't going to get in till late in the morning. So I went to a gig, and my wife went with me, and we come home about 3:30 because we played at 2:30 back then. We got home about 3:30 or 4 o'clock, and there was 3 or 4 fire engines with about 100 people surrounding the house. The house had been burnt down to about 6 inches from the ground. Lost everything. I had a recording studio in there with over 50 recorded songs that I'd lost, a big catalog. We lost all of our clothes. We lost everything we owned. And the Red Cross gave us a voucher for some clothes.
Did all the people survive?
Yes, yeah,
Wow.
there were nobody in it. We lost a couple cats, and that were dead in the fire. But the Red Cross gave us some vouchers for clothes and toothbrushes and brushes and combs, things you wouldn't think of you need, you know, when you lose everything. And they put us in a motel for 2 nights, and I was laying there in the bed with Linda, and I told her, you know, my cousin Teddy's been trying to get us down in Florida for years. We got to start over. Why don't we just go down there? If it don't work out, we can come back home here to Ohio and start over. And so we moved down here to Florida in 1983, November 24th, and never left.
So in a way, the tragedy was a catalyst for you to move on to the next phase of your life and your career.
Well, it happened that way, and I think that's the way most tragedies are. They, you know, there's always some good that comes out of tragedy.
You know, and did you find that you can replace things? But that's why I was concerned that maybe
Sure.
not all the people survived.
Yes. Yeah, everybody survived. We were out playing, and of course I still had my equipment that I had with me, so I didn't lose. I lost a lot of equipment in the fire, but I at least had enough to where I could still work as far as playing music was concerned. And we come down here in Florida, and within 24 hours I had a gig working 5 nights a week, and everything has been here ever since.
So we're going to take a short break. You are watching The Entertainer, and